So today we're going to discuss a topic that's very central to the idea of evolution, which is natural selection. But before we get into that, I want to discuss what evolution isn't. Evolution isn't when this monkey magically transforms into a human. And it's also not when an organism changes when it's in trouble, like a person growing wings after jumping off a building. I want to clarify that this is not what we're thinking of when we discuss evolution. Evolution is a process that occurs to populations of an organism, not individuals. It occurs over millions and millions of years, huge amounts of time, just for really, really small changes. Natural selection is actually one of the ideas that drives evolution. But what is natural selection exactly? Let's jump in and look at an example. Let's say it's thousands of years ago and people are hunter and gatherers to gather food. But they also have to worry about being chased around by wild animals. To survive, these humans need to be able to run away from animals and predators, but also be able to find food. Let's say that one of these two people, these humans, millions and millions of years ago, actually have a special genetic trait which allows them to have longer longer feet, or legs, you can say. This longer leg trait actually allows him to run 2 times faster than everybody else around him. And because of this trait, he's actually able to survive longer because he's able to run away faster when this bear chases him down. This means that this guy with the longer legs is able to reproduce more because he's able to stay alive longer than somebody else who has shorter legs, which allows him to reproduce more at a longer age, at a higher age. And because of he's able to survive, unlike his co-partners who have shorter legs, he's able to survive and his population grows. So the trait of long-leggedness actually stays within the population. Now let's look at this idea again, but a little bit more deeply. Let's say that there's 6 people in the world, and 2 of them have longer legs than everybody else. The guys with longer legs have a 50% chance of surviving and reproducing, while the shorter people only have a 25% chance of surviving and reproducing. That means 1/2 of our longer leg people will survive and reproduce, while 1/4 of the shorter people will survive and reproduce. The people that survive will each have 4 children of the longer leg people, and the guys that reproduce from the shorter leg people will also have 4 children, but they'll be shorter, obviously. That means in our next population, we have 4 people with short legs and 4 people with long legs. And you can already see that more of the population has longer legs than short people, but we started off with a completely different ratio. But let's go ahead and take it to a third generation and see what happens. Let's say half of our long leg people will reproduce, but let's say 1/4 of our short people will reproduce. This means by our third generation, we will have 8 long-legged individuals, but only 4 short-legged ones. Now, if we number our generations 1, 2, and 3, we can see that in the first generation, only 33% was long-legged. In generation 2, 50% was long-legged. In generation 3, 67% was long-legged. And this is only because the trait of having long legs allowed for those individuals to survive and reproduce, counterpart to their short-legged friends. And this is the crux of how natural selection actually works. So why is it called natural selection in the first place? Well, let's keep our example of our short and long-legged people. We use the term selection because one trait is actually better than the other, and it's selected to be passed onto other individuals than other specific traits. Selection could also be referring to a disadvantaged trait. If we have someone that has even shorter legs than the short legs we saw earlier, then they'll be at a disadvantage and they'll die out sooner than everyone else. And we use natural because there isn't a physical person who's selecting which traits to keep and which traits to get rid of. It all has to do with probabilities and who has the greatest chance of surviving. There's no one doing the selecting except nature itself. I just wanted to point out that natural selection does not apply to acquired characteristics. For example, if a father teaches a son how to hunt and this makes the son more survivable, that's not a trait that's actually selected for because it's not genetic. And it's not absolutely passed on to children. That's why we say natural selection only applies to heritable traits, while heritable traits are any genetic trait. So what do we learn? Well, we learned how traits that are more likely to survive get passed on to offsprings, We learned how evolution, which is driven by natural selection, occurs to populations and not individuals, and occurs over a huge period of time. And finally, we learned that natural selection only applies to heritable traits, ones that are heritable and passed down to generations after generations.
How you guys doing? I'm here to talk to you about friendship and natural selection, a study done by Dr. Christakis and Dr. Foster. These scientists believe that friendship and natural selection may go hand in hand. Natural selection is a process in nature in which organisms possessing certain genotypic characteristics that make them better adjusted to an environment tend to survive, reproduce, increase in number or frequency, and therefore are able to transmit and perpetuate their essential genotypic qualities to succeeding generations. An example of this are finches that Darwin studied in the Galapagos Islands. Different finches had different beaks, which helped them flourish differently in their environments. Depending on how they flourished in their environments, these finches went on to pass their alleles and therefore their phenotypic beaks into the next generation. Now, what does this have to do with friendship and natural selection? These scientists believe that friendship can be advantageous to individuals and that we select friends based on this possible advantage. It is known that there's homophily in nature and in humans. Homophily are you make ties with those who are phenotypically similar to you.